Hello and welcome to our Washington Times coverage of Campaign 2024. I'm George Gerbo. We are back with you to discuss the third Republican presidential debate, which took place in Miami, Florida. A reminder that you can go to washingtontimes.com/elections for all of our elections coverage, and that includes the work of my talented guests who join me once again, as they have in the past, national politics reporter Seth McLaughlin. Seth, how are you?
I'm great, George. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And fellow national politics reporter Susan Ferrechio. Susan, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having us, George.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We will get into it off the top here. This third Republican presidential debate, 5 contenders on the stage, pared down significantly since the last time we talked. First thing, Susan, your biggest takeaway off the top from this debate last night in Miami?
It was a fight for top second place person in the race. And it's really significant because former President Trump has a 30-point lead in the early states of Iowa and New Hampshire, real critical voting states that will begin the process of the primary beginning January 15th. He's ahead of them by so much. Many people question whether there's even hope for this second row of contenders that are trying to battle for an opportunity to be on the 2024 ballot. So I think that the big takeaway last night was, what are they fighting for at this point? Is it really realistic that any of them will be the nominee? Unless, of course, you consider something happening to President Trump concerning his 4 criminal cases, whether he'll be permanently sidelined by that or some other issue that makes him either plummet in the polls, it would have to be pretty dramatic, or just makes him somehow ineligible to run. And that's why, last night was important, because let's face it, we really don't know. This is an incredibly unusual election year. Since when have we ever in modern history seen anything like this, where a candidate could possibly be in jail? It's really unusual. And that's why we don't write off these second-tier candidates. And last night's debate was, again, I think the sense among them is that any of them could end up on the ballot. And it was a real hard fight to try to be the number one person. And I think the 2 people who are really duking it out were Haley and DeSantis, who are leading in the polls underneath Trump in Iowa, South Carolina, and in New Hampshire. And that was basically my big takeaway. Like, are any of these people ever going to catch up to Trump? It certainly seems less likely as the days go by. Yet they're still an important component of this race, just because of the lack of predictability we have with what's going on with the former president and his legal troubles right now.
And speaking of the former president, Seth, his counter-programming took place just a few miles away from downtown Miami in Hialeah, where he programmed and had alternative programming to the debate to rally there with some of his supporters. The Cuban community, the Hispanic community in South Florida, a very significant part of the electorate when he won election the last time in South Florida, and it looks like he's trying to get those folks to turn out again in numbers for him and help him carry the state of Florida in 2024.
I think alternative programming is a great way to put it. The split screen between having the people on the debate stage a few miles away in sort of a really traditional format, responding to moderators and, bickering here and there, versus the signature Trump rally down the street where I wasn't there, but usually you have hundreds, maybe 1,000 or so people that show up, and it's more of a circus-like atmosphere. People are there for the show. At one point, Roseanne Barr was on stage, and she was shouting into the microphone about how Trump was a matador and revving up the crowd before he got up. Sarah Sanders Huckabee, formally endorsed him. And one really interesting thing was the mayor of Hialeah, Trump called up on the stage, and during their interaction, he informed Trump that he was going to push the city council to name a street after him. So you have all this going on down the street, and Trump also here and there really poking fun at the 5 rivals that, like Susan said, are trailing pretty badly based on traditional metrics. So I think my biggest takeaway, it was just such a split screen, so emblematic of the entire race so far this year, where, it seems like Trump is going to be Trump. he's got the Teflon Don thing going on so far, and the other candidates are trying to figure out whatever it's going to take to either take him down or solidify that second spot in that battle right now between Haley and DeSantis, and hang on to some sort of glimmer of hope that they can energize voters and put together a coalition of those folks that sort of want to move on from Trump. So it's just, again, I can't drive home enough. Like the split screen, it basically encapsulated the race.
The key to one of these rivals perhaps breaking out and garnering some of their own attention may come from confrontational moments. And we had one of those, Susan, last night in probably what was the moment of the night on a discussion about TikTok, among all things, which Republicans both here in Washington and elsewhere have sought to ban because of ties to China. And you had Vivek Ramaswamy, who was asked by the moderators, hey, you use TikTok for your campaigning. All these other candidates are saying that we should ban it and that we shouldn't have quote unquote Chinese social media infiltrating America. And Vivek said, hey, yes, I use it, but also Nikki Haley's daughter uses it. Nikki Haley responded very fiercely to keep, Will Smith a la style, to keep her daughter's name out of your mouth, and also called him scum at that point. And it was kind of one of a couple of moments between the two of them. Vivek accused Nikki Haley of being Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels. She corrected him to tell Ramaswamy that they were 5-inch heels and that she's not afraid to use them. So their tit for tat back and forth, Susan, shows I think Haley's ascendancy a little bit, as you talked about, as being the now maybe sole number 2 person behind Donald Trump in this Republican primary, but also that she's not going to lay down here without a fight against some of these other candidates when they take jabs at her.
Last night's debate was definitely somewhat of a DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy attack on the ascending Nikki Haley. She's beginning to get close to DeSantis, believe it or not, in Iowa, where his base is supposed to be the strongest. She's ahead of him in South Carolina. She's ahead of him on polling averages in New Hampshire. Of course, all of this is still 30 points behind Trump. So again, it's this fight for number 2. The fight between Vivek and Haley has become increasingly bitter. This issue over TikTok extends back a debate or two when Vivek Ramaswamy was criticized over using his TikTok account for his campaign. And that's why he revived it last night and found a way to strike back at Nikki Haley by saying her own daughter was on using the platform. And that's when she took a swing at him and made that comment. And I think it really was sort of, it was just the epitome of the bitter battle between the two of them that they're now resorting to name calling. And I will say, when he called, people did not hear the whole joke when he was talking about the 3-inch heels, and it made him come across as being a sexist. And you think, well, geez, that's not like Vivek Ramaswamy. He doesn't really take jabs like that. Well, what he said was, she said she was Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels. And there are 2 people on the stage who fit the description. He was talking about—
Meant it for both, yeah.
She was talking about DeSantis, who has been accused by the Trump people of wearing elevators in his boots to make him look taller. So he was basically taking a swipe at both of them, and yet it came across, people didn't hear him. He tried to clarify it later. People were not hearing that. They just heard the thing about 3-inch heels, Dick Cheney, 3-inch heels. The two of them, that was a more exciting part of the debate, and I think it really encapsulated the fact that Nikki Haley is seemingly the one to beat. But if you did watch the debate, you saw who was center stage, and that was Ron DeSantis. He is still considered the second runner, not the front runner. Just if you look at national polls, and I think that he is still considered the stronger candidate. He's losing that position, though, steadily. There was a story in the Financial Times yesterday that one of his main donors is ready to skip over to the Trump camp because they're seeing the fact that neither DeSantis nor anybody else in that of the 5 who were on the stage last night has been able to get anywhere near Trump, cut in his lead in any way. So I think things are looking increasingly difficult for DeSantis. I'm not saying in any way he would ever drop out before Iowa, but he's got he's banking on Iowa. And so he too, not only was Vivek going after Nikki Haley, but he too was attacking Nikki Haley. They had a really heated exchange over China, where he accused her of welcoming the Chinese into the state. Then she came back, with businesses. She was a South Carolina governor. And then she came back later and said, well, you've done, she was ready with her research and said, well, you did the same thing. They were just accused, she was not letting that go. And I think that the real rivalry is Haley and DeSantis. I think Vivek Ramaswamy's poll numbers have not climbed much. He's really just been stuck. Okay? He's not ascending. And what he did last night was try to do what he's done in prior debates, which is put all the attention on himself. The best thing you can do in these debates when you are all stuck 30 points behind Trump and you are not even at the top of that secondary pack is to do anything you can to get the public attention, especially the base. And a lot of the things Vivek Ramaswamy was doing last night, including engaging with Nikki Haley, was just trying to draw attention to himself and come out really swinging against the other candidates. And he definitely succeeded in doing that.
Ramaswamy. Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
It's a double-edged sword for him, though. Like he obviously kind of sprang onto the scene, and he's got a lot of energy, and he's a real smooth talker. He's really a strong politician in a lot of ways. But the style and his desire to be sort of a Trump-like combatant is very unpopular. Like his polling has sunk over the months, and it's the thing that really has dinged him is his likability. Like people, I think he comes off as sort of like the know-it-all. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And nobody's really big into that. And so I think that has hurt him. As far as the stuff with Haley too, I think, like Susan said, maybe it'd come off as sexist and whatnot. And, that could play into Haley's wheelhouse. She's trying to win over women voters. She's trying to really focus on the suburbs, like outside Des Moines, outside places like Manchester, New Hampshire, where those voters might hear something like that and, kind of rally behind her and say, why is this a jerk saying this? Even if, like Susan's saying, maybe the comment wasn't fully heard. And I think the other thing about the TikTok back and forth is it kind of is a reminder that traditional politics is, has flown out the window a long time ago, where it used to be, kids are off the table and you're not supposed to target them and whatnot. But we've seen with the Trump kids, with Biden's kids, and now in this instance that perhaps you hit a certain age and everything's fair game.
Yeah, and I'll point out
that's a great point. And the generational gap too. So you have Vivek using TikTok and talking about Nikki Haley's daughter using TikTok. He's 37. How old is he? 37, 30.
37.
So,
Haley's daughter, an adult as well.
Yeah. Right. The young people using. And it just is a reminder, and it's something that Vivek exploits regularly, that he's the next generation. He brought that up many times. You need a next generation, genius like himself, as he sort of defines himself, to try to lead the country back in the right direction. And that these guys are the old generation, even though they're spring chickens if you compare them to the front runners who are 80 and 77. So it's really, I thought that made it really interesting. And I will say, Vivek came out of the gate swinging not just at Nikki Haley, but he started off with a couple of powerful blows. The first one aimed at the hosts, the NBC hosts, which I thought, if anyone hasn't seen that video, go ahead and look at it. It sort of encapsulates, the Trump base versus the media, and how the media went after President Trump over things that were never proven, like the Trump-Russia collusion stuff. He goes right after them in a way that I have never seen anyone attack moderators. It's become increasingly common for Republicans to sort of go after the moderators. This was some knockout blows. And then the second thing he did, I thought that was really unusual, is he got up on the stage and said that the chairwoman of the RNC needed to resign. And he said, he made some strange offer where he said, if she comes up here and quits right now, she can have the microphone here. I'll just give her the podium. She can do it. And she was in the audience, was not happy about this. Ronna McDaniel, the niece of Mitt Romney, she's been running the RNC for many years and has had a losing streak now going on 3 important elections. And there's a big call in the party that, people are upset and they're looking for someone to blame, and she's become one of the targets of blame. So that's what was the other thing that I thought was, I mean, the RNC organizes those debates, and he gets up on stage and he's like, she needs to go. He's not afraid to say these things. He's not afraid to do things that many party regulars would never do. And that's why he is an unusual part of this campaign. I wonder if he's just paving the way for, a whole new way of behaving in the Republican Party, because I think there are a lot of people in the base that love that. They love that he's willing to get up there and go after Lester Holt on national TV with everybody watching. And he has the microphone. They couldn't stop him. I think Lester Holt said, let's not do this or something, but he just talked right over him. And he went after the head of the party, the RNC. Ron McDaniel was accused of not putting enough money into the Virginia races. They always get accused of this. The RNC is not doing enough. But that was a big moment. And I think for me, it says something about the future of the party, in that it's changing. It really is changing. There's an old guard and a new guard. And I think that Vivek may be just part of that new guard that we were watching on stage last night.
One quick thing on that. He's sort of, in a lot of ways, like a more polished MTG or, something like that, where right. he is really, maybe a good comparison, maybe this is off, but he reminds me a little bit of Pete Buttigieg, where, his ability to articulate things in a different way, it really separates him from the pack. Now, what he says might irritate people and turn people off, and maybe he's not popular and all that stuff. But not only is he polished, but like Susan says, he's doing things outside the box, and it's much more Trump-like. And I would compare it to, like, Don Jr. was down the block in his opening up speech. He was doing imitations of Senator Mitch McConnell freezing during a press conference, right? Like, this is Senator McConnell, who's had health problems, who had an unfortunate event, but he has been billed as an enemy of the Make America Great Again movement, and therefore he's fair game. So I think, you can draw a kind of a straight line between what Vivek does a lot of time and what we saw down the street on the stage at the Trump rally. And
before we touch on some of the issues, Seth, as Susan mentioned about Ron DeSantis, I wanted your thoughts. He once again in the post-debate in the spin room touted his endorsement in Iowa from Republican Governor Kim Reynolds, and he's trying to use that and kind of nudge some of the support of people who either may be undecided or maybe just on the fence. And he kind of described it as, in the post wrap up with NBC, 25% of people are going to vote for Trump regardless of what I do. But I believe that there's still 50% out there who would vote for Trump, but they could have an alternative. And he's trying to capture those people along with the remaining 25% of people who may be just overall undecided. For someone who's covered Iowa like you have, do you think that did he look or feel any better last night? He came off a little less wooden, was the first image that came to my mind. It was a little less of the forced smile. Appears he's got some coaching on that, his reactions and expressions. But do you think that makes a dent at all in Iowa, being a little more likable, and also the endorsement from Reynolds?
I think he has gotten better at this, and I think his presentation last night was obviously the best so far for a debate. He can be a little socially awkward here and there, and, the Trump people have fun picking at that. As far as Iowa goes, there's, if you look on a piece of paper, there's 50 plus voters out there, 50% plus, that are up for grabs. If we strictly go by the polls, Trump is, I think, hovering around 40% or something like that. But, so if he holds that, you get 60% to go after. Now, that's all theoretical, right? And DeSantis is going to be making that case. It's kind of the only case you have to make at this point. And to his credit, he is spending a ton of time in Iowa. And again, this is where we get into the then and now, where traditionally, if you wanted to win in Iowa, you spend a ton of time in Iowa. And he's done that. He's just about to hit the full Grassley, they call it, named after Senator Chuck Grassley, the longtime senator from Iowa, where each year he would go to all 99 counties. And DeSantis, I believe he's going to clear that in the next couple of months or so, maybe even before that. So he's doing what you're supposed to do traditionally. Unfortunately for him, or I guess the caveat there is this so far is so far away from a traditional race that it's hard to see, or who knows how it's going to play out. But if he's going to do anything, it seems like he's got to have a strong. If anyone's got to do anything, they got to have a strong showing in Iowa and show they can compete with Trump. Otherwise, maybe someone can revive their bid in New Hampshire, but then they'd be looking to the courts to try to trip them up.
Susan, let's get into some of the issues here. Multiple candidates said, most substantive debate so far of the cycle because of the format where opponents weren't allowed to directly attack each other anytime they were mentioned. And again, having only 5 people on the stage as opposed to 7 or 12 helps that a lot. Very heavy on foreign policy early. Israel, Ukraine, China, even Venezuela in terms of, relating to oil and oil security, all, started the debate. I know Israel's been front of mind for a lot of people. I personally would have flipped the order. I liked the stuff that they said in the back half of the debate and found that to be more interesting because there's there's not much daylight between Republicans in terms of Israel at this point. There is, of course, on Ukraine, but not much on China either. But they talked about Social Security, which is something I don't believe we've heard in either of these 3 debates, and whether you should raise the retirement age, lower the retirement age for that. The border in regards to fentanyl. Ron DeSantis said he would send special forces into Mexico to shoot them dead, shoot these cartels and people that are trafficking these drugs across the southern U.S. border with Mexico, would shoot them dead. Vivek Ramaswamy called it a form of bioterrorism. I think he even mildly suggested a wall with our northern neighbor Canada, and then also getting into the immediacy of what happened on Tuesday, which honestly, for me, I think should have led the debate in how in Virginia, as you guys have reported, in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, big Democratic wins. Kentucky, Andy Beshear wins re-election over Daniel Cameron. Big Democratic returns positive for the Democrats in those states, and initiatives for enshrining abortion rights into the Constitution, issue 1 in Ohio, and also in Virginia, Democrats holding one of the chambers, taking back the other. They touched on abortion again. Haley, who reiterated her position from the earlier debates, which is still, hey, let the states kind of play out how they're going to. And as she's repeated before, I don't believe there's 60 votes in the Senate to make any change. So we need to find consensus where there is consensus on this issue. Tim Scott calling for the 15-week federal ban, which, as Seth reported this week, was something that in Virginia that they would have liked to campaign on and tried to do, and that was, rebuffed. Governor Glenn Youngkin saying, hey, if you give me the legislature, we'll go with the 15-week ban, and that was not appeasing at all to voters. But in terms of these issues, Susan, anything that stuck out and kind of rose to the top of something that you might not have heard before, or something that was more striking than it had been in previous debates?
I agree with you that the domestic stuff came across as more compelling to me because there's more differences between the candidates. And it's, when you talk about what voters care about, it tends to be domestic issues first. And of course, Israel's a huge deal right now. And you're right, there's not a lot of daylight between them, although Vivek Ramaswamy differentiates himself in terms of how much he's willing to help any Ukraine or Israel. Once doesn't want to help Ukraine at all. And with Israel, he's sort of the same way. He supports what they're doing to defend themselves against the terror organization Hamas, but he doesn't think that, he says his answer is, I'm busy. He says, I'm busy attacking intruders on our southern border. In other words, we've got our own problem to take care of. And that's his. So he's a little bit different there. And what stood out to me in the foreign debate was, again, Vivek trying to accuse his competitors of being these corrupt war hawks who are looking to, he said that Nikki Haley left her job as U.S. ambassador to the UN and then became a board member at Boeing and profited off of that. He described the war hawks in Washington as bloodthirsty, as always trying to get U.S. involved into these foreign entanglements that profit a lot of people. That's an important issue. So to me, that stood out because that's a part of where the Republican Party base is going. They side with him on this. This is a Trumpian point of view. Trump he says he will solve all these world crises, immediately upon, entering office, that he'll solve it all. Everyone will be happy. But he also does not want, he doesn't want us involved in these foreign wars either. And he has made that the case. So I think that was a really important debate because of the world, as Nikki Haley said, is on fire. So that was important. And they put it first, took up, the first half of the debate. The second half, the thing that stood out to me on domestic issues, on Social Security, I believe Nikki Haley was the only one on the stage who said that we should lower the age of eligibility for Social Security. Huge issue. So she's saying people in their 20s would have a different retirement age. And then you had Tim Scott in a big play for Iowans talking about the hardworking Iowan farmers who probably wouldn't want to have their retirement age raised. That was a really important debate. It's another big deal for the Republican Party because entitlements is the big driver of our debt. Republicans campaign on lowering our debt. Big issue. Second issue, of course, is abortion. I listened to what everybody had to say about that. Tricky stuff following what happened, not only in this election on Tuesday, but the midterms. They are in a quandary post-Dobbs with the Supreme Court getting rid of Roe v. Wade. They haven't been able to navigate this well. There may not be a way for them to navigate this well, but if you were going to have a message, I thought the person who did it the best last night was Nikki Haley, where, I'm not sure if what she said is 100% sort of tangible. She kind of had her foot in the two camps where I get it. People don't want the government telling them what to do on this issue, but that she supports life. And so she supports what happened in all these states, even the states where, she doesn't agree with it, but they do not have any restrictions on the procedure. She navigated it well. And as a woman, she was able to do that, I think, with greater ease. And then you had DeSantis trying to mimic that a little bit, not necessarily copy her, but sort of have the same game plan where I support life. He said, he signed a 6-week ban in Florida, which could definitely hurt him if he's a general election candidate. And so he sort of said the same thing. And the states can decide. Tim Scott came out and said, I would support a federal 15-week ban. Nothing beyond 15 weeks should be allowed. So he was the only one there willing to come out and stick to that abortion limit, even though, of course, it's not selling well with the electorate in these swing states, or I don't know if you call Virginia a swing state anymore. It's more blue. But it's going to be really important in swing states that they need to win, like Wisconsin. So all of those answers to me were really interesting because what you saw was post-election day, which was kind of a debacle for Republicans. You saw them really trying to refit their message on this issue, on a really tough issue. I think it's really sinking in at this point that they have their biggest problem may be the abortion issue for 2024.
And there's some, before you go, Seth, there's some of that balance of, we'll call, traditional conservatism, states as the incubators of democracy, which is what the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade did, where you remand the issue back to the states and say, let the states decide. Well, some of the states are deciding, and some of these Republican politicians aren't necessarily liking what the states are deciding, but, in terms of having a less government intervention and letting people decide, that's traditionally been a Republican ethos, if not necessarily agreeing with what the party and these candidates are espousing as their position.
And a major problem they have right now is trying to figure out whether it's the policy stance or the message, right? And I think most Republicans are trying to say still it's the message. So not only that kind of back and forth, but that debate playing out in competitive battleground states. Like if you're down south and you're in a deep red state, you don't have to worry about this, right? You're right on the policy. You're right on the message, blah, blah, blah. But they're going to figure out, over the course of the 2024 election, whether it is the policy, whether, like we saw in Virginia, that 15 weeks is just not acceptable to the general public in the battleground states that matter, and that could tip the scales. Now, saying that, a really, really interesting dynamic of all this is our guy Trump, right? He credits himself with putting the justices on the Supreme Court that opened the door for the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which provided the constitutional right to an abortion. Since then, he has kind of taken a hands-off approach, though. He's basically gone, this is a state's issue at this point. I'll consider stuff, but he hasn't taken a hard side on the 15-week debate proposal. In fact, the only thing he's really taken a stand on is to say, whatever it is, there should be exceptions for cases of rape, incest in the life of the mother, which is something that's not in a lot of, or in some state laws that seek to ban abortion. So in a way, Trump could be out in front of this as far as the general election message goes. And perhaps it's something he learned in the past. It's a way to diffuse that political bomb. And again, the test case will come a year from now, if he's the nominee.
Right.
And as we wind down here, two more quick things I wanted to hit on. If you have a thought for what I'll call the trailing two, Chris Christie and Tim Scott, both at opposite ends of the stage there. If you needed a look at where the Republican Party has been and where it's going, you can start from the edge of the stage and kind of move inward a little bit. Chris Christie, a very traditional, invoked 9/11 a couple of different times, of course, in terms of, his experience as a prosecutor in New York and New Jersey. Even mentioned in the debate about Russia and Vladimir Putin, which I thought was kind of striking, two different times alluded to what Vladimir Putin is doing is akin to what happened in the lead up to World War II, and mentioned that first it's Ukraine and then it'll be the Balkans and then it'll be Poland, which I don't think any candidate has used such strong terms as that. But of course, Christie comes from a part of the Republican Party, whether you want to call him neoconservative or not, that's traditionally been in favor of protecting those democracies in Europe and elsewhere. And then on the opposite side of the stage, Susan, is Tim Scott, who it appears, at least through my ear, has taken up the mantle that Mike Pence has left behind since he exited the race. And of course, has been a Christian and talked about his faith a lot, but he leaned into that further in this debate without Pence there. And Pence, traditionally, if I said conservative Christian candidate, Mike Pence, former vice president, kind of rose to the top in those previous discussions. But now Tim Scott appears to be leaning into that mantle, quoting scripture multiple different times and framing most of these issues around his faith and trying to assume that vacuum that maybe Mike Pence has left a little bit in this debate field.
George, I think you put it perfectly. He really, to me, I was watching that thinking, well, Pence isn't here, but Tim Scott is sort of picking up where Mike Pence left off, and that is true. So the two candidates we haven't talked about much is Tim Scott and Chris Christie on the edges of the stage. They get put there because they're barely making the stage. Some people are questioning whether they'll make the next debate stage whenever that may occur. And it's important that they're much lower in the polls than Trump, and they're at the bottom of this second tier pack. And I thought last night that of the two of them, Tim Scott had the stronger performance. And Chris Christie, like you said, appeared more like yesterday's Republican, I guess. The problem for Christie is that he has to draw further and further into the past to tell voters about his experience, because he hasn't been in office in a long time. And he was a Republican governor of a blue state, which is unusual. And he touts that and touts his experience as a prosecutor, and talked about, he was able to get into the issue of what was happening with Muslims post 9/11, which relates to what's going on today with the anti-Semitism and these issues at universities right now with these demonstrations. So that was relevant, and he made himself relevant in that debate on that issue. And he managed to bust in several times and really get into the game. But mostly, to me, the debate was DeSantis, Haley, and Vivek really duking it out in the middle. And then occasionally you'd get, they try to include Tim Scott in there, and his 15-week abortion ban, again, he stood out on that as well. But I think that the real hard issue for the two of them are their poll numbers, their donations, things like that are going to make it harder for them to make the next debate and to just stay in the game here.
I'd say this too about Tim Scott. Tim Scott is all in on Iowa. He's open about being all in Iowa. And if he doesn't finish strong, it's over, right? I think that's pretty fair to say. Chris Christie is all in on New Hampshire. If he doesn't do well there, I think it's fair to say he's gone, right? And this is if they make it, right, to those two contests. And the other thing I would say about Tim Scott is that he has tried to inject race into his message. And he's done it in a way of saying the progressive liberal policies that have been enacted in places like Chicago, he visited a church there, I want to say a couple of weeks ago, have decimated the Black community. They've created crime, they've led to bad schools, and basically, kept Black people down that liberal Democrats say they're trying to lift up. And he is basically saying you should give our policies a look. Now, the interesting part of that is you got to do well in Iowa, and there are not a lot of Black people in Iowa. Now, perhaps that message works in the sense that, traditional conservatives are like seeing someone bring their message into blue areas and basically say what they've been believing all along. But it's a unique, if nothing else, it's a unique thing that he can do as a sole Black candidate in the race. Whether it gains traction or not, who knows?
I'll get us out of here, Susan and Seth, on one final topic. We've done a good job of covering kind of, I think, the base and the whole here of the debate. As Susan mentioned, as we move forward, you may see candidates like Christie and DeSantis fall off, Christie and Scott fall off the stage there in terms of polling and thresholds. I'm curious, as a final thought, as we move forward into the next debate and as the calendar gets closer to the holidays and into the new year, do you see Trump at all potentially with a smaller winnowed candidate field hopping into one of these races? It makes sense that he doesn't want to be up there when there's 12 people to take away the spotlight from him. It makes sense if he was one of 6 up there. But if he's one of 3 or one of 4, would he potentially relish the opportunity, even though most polls and political observers would agree that he doesn't necessarily need to in terms of capturing votes? But do you think going forward in one of these debates that he will take part before the general election cycle comes? I'll start with Susan.
If his lead is 40 points, no, I don't think he's going to get, unless he's bored and wants to, get on the stage and tangle with these candidates. His rationale has been, why get on the stage and potentially harm myself when I'm ahead so much that these candidates don't even matter. I mean, if you see the polls closing and where you see less daylight between him and Nikki Haley or DeSantis and it gets close and he has to go debate, I think he will. But if he doesn't have to, my bet is he's just going to keep doing what he's doing. Why? Because it's working.
I would agree with Susan. I think, the race would have to change dramatically. I would, add that, everything politically you think about is like, oh yeah, it doesn't make any sense for Trump to do stuff. But Trump is, a very unpredictable character. So who knows? He might say, yeah, I want to go on stage and smack the crap out of these people just because I'm Donald Trump and that's what I feel like doing. Before we leave, George, I want to drop one quick thing in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so there's been several polls out this week that showed Donald Trump is leading Joe Biden. And there was a New York Times poll in particular that showed him leading Biden in 5 of the 6 traditional battleground states. Now, I don't know, I got caught up in one point of the poll that basically did generic testing. It said, if Trump was running against a generic Democrat, who would you vote for? And respondents said by about 8%, the generic Democrat. On the flip side, they said, if a generic Republican was running against Biden, who would you vote for? They said the generic Republican by a wider margin. So not only does that speak to, Biden's weakness right now, a year out from the election, but it also speaks to the fact voters still hate the idea of a rematch between Trump and Biden. It is hanging there. So much so that Robert F. Kennedy now is polling in 20%. I think, I don't know if this Times poll, but another poll showed him the top choice of voters under 45, right? So there is a immense appetite for something else. And it'll be curious to see how that plays out over the coming months, because who knows? You got a president that's 80, people think he has health problems or whatever, concerned about his ability to do the job. You have another guy who's 77, same thing, you're 77, and you could be in jail. So there's all kinds of wild political crosswinds going on here.
minor.
that are just there, and they're going to be there, and it makes the whole cycle, it cranks it up one more level.
Still a long way to go. We, of course, will be there to cover it for you all. Susan, Seth, I appreciate it as always.
Thank you, George.
Absolutely. A reminder that you can find this recap and all of our post-debate coverage and our campaign 2024 coverage at washingtontimes.com/elections. For Seth, for Susan, I'm George. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.